Well, hello, everyone. Welcome to the web. My name is Jasmine Mejia Munoz, and I'm with the California Marine Sanctuary Foundation on detail for the Monterey Bay National Marine Sanctuary. And this is part of our summer seminar web series. And today we're focusing on understanding agricultural plastics in the US and beyond. And in our last webinar, we did a collaboration with Open Farms. In this webinar, we're doing a collaboration with SWIX and the Ag Plastic Recycling Conference with Gene Jones. And so this is an official pre-workshop for that conference. And I also want to thank all of our collaborators. It really takes a team to put this event together. So thank you to all of the speakers. And a special shout out to Will, who's our summer intern, to Alina, who's with our plastic culture team, and with Tanya, who's with the California Sea Grant team as well. Together, we've worked really hard in gathering all of these great speakers for this event. And I want to acknowledge our funding. So we're able to host these webinar series and all of our outreach events under the commercially scalable end-of-life solutions for agricultural field plastic films used in watersheds draining out to national marine sanctuaries. And this is under the Infrastructure and Investments Jobs Act. Federal funding, of course, has been very vital to all of the work that we do. And under that collaboration, we've worked really closely with, of course, the Sea Grant Office, the Cal Poly team, Flipping Iron, Andrews Engineering, and Washington State University, as well as with different partners from the agriculture sector, including growers and strawberry industry. So for that, we're really thankful. And really, in addition, as we commented, we have this collaboration with SWIX. And I want to invite everyone and remind everyone that registration is now open for the Agricultural Plastics Recycling Conference and Trade Show. This is hosted in San Diego from August 13 to the 15th. You can scan the QR code here, and different partners of ours will be there presenting on other projects. Alina will be giving a talk on our work around biodegradable mulch, but it's really a great spot for all plastic culture related items. So I invite you all to attend this conference. And I'll give just a quick overview about plastic culture. So plastic culture, of course, refers to different plastic technologies that are used in agricultural systems. Now, this webinar is not going to be focusing on explaining the different types of plastic culture technologies. However, if you want to have a deeper understanding of the different plastic culture technologies and different alternatives that are available now for growers in California's Central Coast, and both collection and recycling opportunities, I invite you to visit our previous webinar. You can find that again with this QR code, or you could also find it in our YouTube page under California Marine Sanctuary Foundation. We have this webinar in both English and Spanish, and it did a great job in just covering all of the different practices, and also just going into the history of plastic culture to understand where we're at now and how we got here. And as part of our collaboration between the California Marine Sanctuary Foundation, the Monterey Bay National Marine Sanctuary, and the agricultural stakeholders, we work closely under the Agriculture Water Quality Alliance. And one of our top missions for that alliance is to protect and enhance water in the Monterey Bay National Marine Sanctuary and the adjacent watersheds while sustaining a world-class production in agriculture. Specifically in the regions that we work with across California's Central Coast, we recognize that agriculture is a very important part of our economy, a very important part of our culture and our heritage. And as a whole, agriculture is really important for California. In this chart, for example, you'll see that everything that is in bold, this represents crops where California is the sole producer, meaning that California is producing 99% or more of these commodities. So again, very important for California and very important for us to work collaboratively and closely with the agricultural stakeholders. Again, if you want a deeper dive into plastic culture, its background, where we're at, and why it's used, how it's used, I suggest that you watch or hear our previously recorded webinar. Um, but I just want to remind everyone that there are a lot of benefits in this presentation and in this webinar. You'll hear some of the challenges, but I just want to remind everyone that there are reasons as to why growers use plastic culture. One of the words that you'll hear often throughout the presentation is going to be the word mulch. For those that are not familiar, mulch refers to the thin layer of plastic film that's used across beds, row crop beds. That's used across different commodities and different crops. But it's important to note that plastics such as mulch or drip tape is lined under the mulch, and it helps irrigate directly into the roots, have different benefits, both from weed suppression that also help support with reducing labor, but then it also has environmental benefits such as reducing the amount of water that gets evaporated and really maximizing nutrient utilization. So a series of different benefits. And now I'll pass it on to Will, who will be going a little bit over housekeeping and giving us an overview of what we can expect today.
Hello, my name is William Kuda. I'm a CSU Coast intern, and I'd like to thank CSU Coast and the California Sea Grant for allowing me to be here. I'd like to start by introducing our speakers. First of which is Dr. Seeta Sistla. Dr. Seeta Sistla is a scientist at Cal Poly San Luis Obispo. She focuses on how plants and soil respond to changes in climate, land use, and nutrient availability across different environments. And today she'll be presenting on the difficulties of plastics use in agriculture. We will then be hearing from Sara Orofino. She is a scientist with the Nature Conservancy's California Oceans Program. She provides scientific and technical expertise to address pressing conservation challenges, including efforts to quantify plastic use and plastic fate in California, which is what she will be presenting on today. We will then hear from Gene Jones, who's the CEO of the Southern Waste Information Exchange, which is a Florida nonprofit supporting waste management since 1981. Gene has over 30 years of experience in the field, and he will be presenting on plastic culture use and plastic culture end of life in Florida. Our final speaker is Giulia Carcasci. She's an agriculture, plastics, and sustainability specialist. She's been working with the Food and Agriculture Organization for the past 2 years. She uses her expertise to create a more sustainable agriculture community. And she will be giving us a look into plastic culture use in Europe, as well as updating us on the Voluntary Code of Conduct. We will then move into a series of questions targeted towards the future of plastic culture for our panel to answer. I want to remind everyone again, interpretation is available. And I also want to remind everyone to keep your cameras off, please, as well as your microphones, and leave all questions you have in the chat. With that, I'll hand it off to our first speaker. Is Seeta in? Yeah, so Seeta, you have the floor.
Okay. Thank you very much, Will, and thank you, Jasmine and Alina and everyone for hosting us today. So today I'm just going to give a brief introduction for why we should care about agricultural plastics, how they're serving as a pollutant, but also the benefits of plastics and what we can do to help to understand how they are accumulating and where we can remediate them. So I can't seem to click. Thank you. So it's only recently been recognized that plastics are actually accumulating in soils, both agriculture and non-agricultural soils. And recently, the FAO has declared boldly that plastics are a threat to food security, health, and the environment. So statements like this I think, require and beg data about what are the sources and consequences of plastics in our environment, the cost benefits, because as Jasmine alluded to, we use plastics in agriculture or plastic culture because they do have a multitude of benefits in terms of production and reducing resources like water, etc. Next slide. So today I'm going to give a brief overview of some work that's been coming out of my research group, looking at plastics as a novel soil pollutant that are derived from agricultural sources. We're going to look at why plastics are accumulating in agricultural systems, some of the implications of macroplastic or large fragment accumulation, and then trying to understand the relationship between large fragments and smaller fragments in the environment. Next slide. Okay, so just a brief overview. So plastic culture. Plastic culture is so ubiquitous that many of us don't even realize it's part of our agricultural system. And it has been branded as its own kind of portmanteau of plastic and agriculture. And so all three of these images show plastic being used and integrated into agricultural production. So on the right-hand side of your screen, you can see plastic mulch that's used in a variety of different cropping systems. It's useful to keep moisture in, keep plants from touching soil and being exposed to soil-borne pathogens, and keep plants and high-value commodities clean. So there's a lot of reasons, modulate soil temperature. There's a lot of reasons why people use mulch in soils, and plastic mulch has a number of benefits. We also can see in the picture in the center and on the left, we have greenhouses that have a plastic sheet to insulate the air around the growing plants. We have plastic beds and then drip tape. All of these are different forms of plastic polymers that are widespread and used in agriculture. And their intention is sometimes for multiple uses over multiple years and seasons. Sometimes it's single use. So in the case of plastic mulches, which is the focus of my lab's work, they're single use. You use them for a season and then you take them off and dispose of them. Next slide. Okay, so just a little bit of an overview. So while plastic mulch is really useful in improving crop yield and reducing some of those resource inputs like water and drought-stressed or dry systems, we use a lot of it, partly reflecting that it is a way of increasing crop productivity. The FAO now estimates that we're using over 12.5 million tons annually of agricultural plastics, 12.5 million tons annually with 8 million tons of film alone. So film is the dominant form of plastics used on an annual basis. And mulch is estimated to cover over 25 million acres of farmland globally, and that continues to grow across the world and across different cropping systems. And as you can see, the pictures on the top show the removal of both the mulch and also drip tape and the workers involved, because this is also a labor-intensive process both to lay and to remove this material from fields. Next slide. And so plastics, while they're supposed to come off the field entirely, we know they're not. And so plastics are a global pollution burden, and they are increasingly recognized as ubiquitous across different environments, both from agricultural and non-agricultural sources. Because they're an essential part of modern agriculture, we see plastics accumulating in agricultural soils, and I'll talk a little bit about some of the data we have from my group today. But recent estimates say that plastics are upwards of 2 times as much, twofold as much as in freshwater or aquatic systems. And historically, people focused on plastic in water systems because it was easy to see. And the consequences of it on marine and aquatic life are pretty clear, especially when they're large pieces that are getting either tangled or ingested by fauna. But we now see that they are actually also accumulating in large degrees in these soil systems as well. We have a diverse source of plastic. So plastic culture is one of them. We also see plastics being applied through things like bio-waste or sludge, through runoff and wind dispersal. So both intentional in the sense that they are mixed in with other things we're adding to soils, and unintentional by movement through the system. Part of what is complicated about studying plastics in the soil environment is that there are diverse types. So polyethylene, polyvinyl chloride, etc., lots of different polymers, and they're diverse types in terms of shape and size, and some of them are associated with toxins and pesticide accumulation and other challenges once they're within the soil or aquatic system. Next slide. Oops. Can you go back one? Thanks. So many of you may have heard about macro versus microplastics or nanoplastics, and I just want to highlight the operational definition. So macroplastics are plastics of any type that are bigger than about 5 millimeters in diameter. So they're visual fragments that you can clearly see, whether they're in soil or water, as long as they're not clear. As you move down in scale, macroplastics can fragment into microplastics and then micro into nano, so less than 5 millimeters and then less than a micron. As you move down in size class, the surface area to volume increases. This is just a property of any physical system. And the potential for being more interactive with biological systems increases. So very, very small particles can potentially cross cell membranes and be uptaken more easily by biological organisms, and they can co-transport contaminants because they tend to absorb contaminants more easily when they're very, very small. However, I want to highlight that the tiny fragments are coming, the nano and microplastics are coming primarily from larger pieces. We make larger pieces for applications in the environment. So I want to stress that one thing that we are thinking a lot about in my group and others is how to reduce the inflow of large plastic fragments into our environment from agricultural sources. Next slide. So the fate of agricultural plastics is challenging to track, partly because it's relatively new in the spotlight of realizing that it is accumulating in the landscape. People are not trying to apply plastics as pollutants to their fields. Obviously, people try to be good stewards of the environment. The fragmentation is a byproduct that is inevitable as you use plastics over time, no matter how good your management is. Part of it is because there's diverse sources. As I mentioned, it's not just from plastic culture. They can also come in via atmospheric deposition or irrigation runoff or from sludge application. And part of the complexity comes from the fact that once these plastics are integrated into the soil, they can become very, very difficult to detect analytically through instrumentation. They're hard to find even if they're still there. So because of a variety of sort of lab challenges and also the challenges of having so many inputs from the environment, we are really at the forefront of tracing where they're coming from and where they're going in the environment. Next slide. So I want to talk a little bit about macroplastics, those larger fragments. Next slide, because these are what is visible to see. So in my lab, we spent a couple of years trying to identify whether well-managed fields in California were accumulating agricultural plastic debris, and if so, how was it affecting soil properties? And so if you look in these images here, you can actually see some of these plastic fragments left behind. Again, not intentionally, it just they fragment and they break apart even with the best of managed fields. Next slide. So again, some images here showing those macroplastics, and the macroplastics are easy to see. So they're easier to quantify than those microplastics. Next slide. So what we did was we sampled 12 farms across the central coast of California, and we looked at these farms after the plastic had been removed from the season, the plastic mulch, and quantified how much plastic was in quadrats across the field, meter square quadrats, and then how much microplastics was in the surface soil, and did it relate to the larger plastic fragments, those visible plastic fragments. So what did we find? Next slide. We found a lot of plastic. So upwards of 215,000 pieces of plastic per hectare were identified. And so again, these are in fields across California. There was quite a bit of variation, but every field we sampled had both polyethylene plastic fragments and also PVC from drip tape and other plastic debris in it. Next slide. And this represented about 3% of the field area. And we found using FTIR that polyethylene was the dominant source of plastic in the field. Next slide. So we found that as plastic levels went up, there was a negative relationship with a bunch of different soil properties, including moisture, soil respiration, so microbial activity, plant available phosphate, and soil carbon pools. And this was across agricultural fields, so we controlled for the fact that field identity was different. So this suggests that as plastic debris accumulates, large plastic debris, we see that there may be some deleterious effects on soils when they're not being fertigated. So again, this is during the time that they were fallowed, and we can talk more about the mechanism in the questions. Next. So, a lot of people, including our lab, want to know what is the relationship between large scale plastic pollution, so there's macroplastic and microplastics, and where is plastic on the landscape in a broader sense? Next slide. So we went through a series of lab protocols to separate out microplastics. And again, if people want to ask more on the details, I'm happy to talk about it. It takes a lot of work to sample these fields. And so we went through and we measured microplastics in all of the quadrats from all of the samples we collected. Next slide. And what we found was that across fields, the amount of macroplastics, so that's the x-axis, correlates pretty strongly with microplastics. And so what this suggests is that we can use visible plastic contamination as an indicator, potentially, of how much microplastic is accumulating in our fields, and hopefully find fields to help ameliorate or clean up or reduce the plastic pollution before it becomes microplastics, before it fragments. Next slide. We are also in my lab, and we're going to talk about this in the next talk too, trying to upscale. So understanding using a remote sensing approach, where is plastic on the landscape? Where has it historically been? And is there intensification in terms of the number of applications per year or extensification in terms of where is it spreading on the landscape as potential hotspots for plastic pollution and also areas where we may want to target remediation efforts in terms of proximity to key waterways, et cetera. So we're trying to upscale as well as downscale. Next slide. And so lastly, my lab is doing a lot of work to try to understand some of those mechanisms that are driving the ecosystem effects we observe from large plastic fragments that were accumulating in the landscape and the deleterious effects on some soil properties. We're doing lab-based studies to really control for soil variability. We're working, moving forward, trying to understand where plastic is being applied on landscapes more generally, and whether we can identify hotspots for targeting remediation or controls on movement into watersheds. And importantly, we're trying to understand what will inform farmer decision making and policy. So how do we use this technology, plastic culture, in a smart way that can promote healthy ecosystems without being pollution burden through the externalities of the fragmentation of the material. So next slide. And I think that this really highlights the idea of trying to really think about in this plastic-free July that we're in, how do we do reflective consumption or to help reduce the plastic burden? And this is an open question and something we can discuss more generally with the group. So with that, I think I'm out of time. So this is my last slide, just a thank you slide. So this work would not be possible to do without a group of a lot of scientists and collaborators, as well as foundational support from a number of different agencies. So thank you very much, and I look forward to talking more during the questions. I see some questions popping up in the chat.
Hi, Seeta. Yeah, so our first question is from Afreen Malik. Did you distinguish by commodity? Do some commodities use more plastics than others? And therefore more plastic debris in the field?
So we only sampled in fields where there was known mulch application. So all of our fields were fields that grew strawberries, but they also some of them rotate with other crops, but they all had known plastic application. So I would say that we didn't distinguish among commodity because we targeted a commodity that we knew pretty much exclusively uses plastic mulch in its growing.
And then our next question is Aaron Slattery. Is it possible to use more reusable plastic products other than creating waste?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's work on using biodegradable plastics, recycling the plastic material or reusing it in other forms. One of the challenges with the mulch in particular is that once it's applied to the field, the crop is done for the season, it tends to be removed because the fields tend to get turned over and used for another crop. And so if you were planting the same thing over and over, the plastic can stay around for longer. But when the fields are being rotated relatively quickly, multiple times in an actual a year, it makes it challenging to reuse that material. The drip tape is harvested and recycled more readily. The plastic mulch is more challenging, but I think others will also be talking about that today. Other questions?
Okay, can you all hear me? Hope so. Okay.
Oh, sorry. Yes, we can hear you, Sarah. Thank you.
Okay, good. Good morning, everyone. My name is Sara Orofino, and I'm a scientist with the California chapter of the Nature Conservancy. And I'm excited to be here and talking with you all today about agricultural plastic use in California. I'll be touching a little bit on the drivers of plastic use and some of those benefits and environmental costs, and then a little bit about what we know and what we still need to learn about plastic use. Next, please. Agriculture is a deeply rooted part of California's identity. From the strawberry fields of the Central Coast to the orchards in the Central Valley, agriculture in California is more than just an industry. It feeds our families here in California and beyond. It supports economies and livelihoods and shapes the landscapes that we call home. California has over 23.7 million acres of cropland across more than 68,000 farms. We grow over 400 crops and nearly $60 billion of agricultural products are sold. California farms are a vital part of our state's economy. Next, please. But as California farms have grown more efficient and productive, they've also become more reliant on plastic. Plastic use is everywhere in our modern day lives, and it is no different in agriculture. Globally, the Food and Agriculture Organization of the United Nations estimated at least 12.5 million tons of plastic were used in agricultural production in 2018. That's 3.5% of annual global plastic production. And here in California, it's hard to drive around the state without seeing fields covered in mulch films or miles of hoop houses like the ones shown in this Landsat image of Oxnard, California. But plastic didn't end up on these farms by accident. Plastic use is growing in California and globally because it solves real problems and has many short-term benefits to farmers. Next. Thank you. Plastic is versatile, lightweight, inexpensive, and is used increasingly in agricultural practices around the world. In a state that's as water constrained as California, every drop of water counts. The plastic mulch films we've heard a little bit about reduce evaporation losses from the soil, and precision watering through drip tape irrigation helps farmers stretch their limited water supplies further. Mulch film and hoop houses also can increase crop yields, and they reduce chemical usage by warming soils, keeping weeds at bay, and extending growing seasons. Plastics are also important for food safety. They reduce food loss, limit food rot and disease, and preserve freshness to ensure that high-quality food can make it from the farm to your table. Next, please. Agricultural plastics have brought undeniable benefits to California farms, but they also have environmental impacts. These materials are often designed for single use and have become essential tools in modern farming, but also represent a growing source of pollution. They can enter the environment by being damaged, degraded, or discarded, where they can pose threats to human and ecosystem health. As we just heard, over time, these plastics can break down into smaller fragments, embedding themselves in the soil and raising concerns about long-term contamination. Ongoing research is investigating the potential long-term negative impacts of this plastic accumulation on soil health and crop yields, and ultimately the resilience of our food systems. As the plastics break down into microplastics, the soils, they can contaminate our food, our drinking water, and nearby ecosystems. And these microplastics are being found everywhere. And we're just beginning to understand the impacts that these contaminants can have on ecosystems and wildlife and health. Once in the environment, plastics don't stay put. They're carried by wind and water and travel from fields into rivers and wetlands and beyond. But despite this widespread use and potential negative impacts, agricultural plastics are largely unmanaged in California. We lack even the most basic information on how much plastic is being used, where it's concentrated, and what happens to it after harvest. And these data gaps make it really hard to understand the full scope of the problem or to design effective management solutions. Next. Our team at the Nature Conservancy has been exploring ways to fill some of these information gaps for 3 primary field macroplastics: drip tape, mulch films, and hoop houses. Next. Drip tape is a core component of California's precision irrigation, and it significantly decreases the amount of water that you need to grow food. And it's the most widely used plastic in California by weight. Drip tape can be single use, used for one growing season and then removed, or more durable, lasting up to 25 years. Single-use drip tape is especially common in fast-growing annual crops. Leafy greens, strawberries, broccoli, cauliflower, onions, and garlic have the highest drip tape usage in terms of linear feet per acre. And these crops are grown in all but 10 counties throughout the state. The map on the right shows total drip tape usage in tons in the 2023 water year by county. Monterey, Santa Barbara, Merced, Fresno, and Imperial counties have the highest amount of drip tape generated annually and also really high densities of these fast-growing annual crops. Our estimates suggest that California uses approximately 45,000 metric tons of single-use drip tape each year. And in the multi-cropping system, where 2 or more crops are grown on the same piece of land each year, drip tape must be removed and replaced between growing seasons. And this presents substantial waste management challenges for growers who typically have to pay to landfill their drip tape. Drip tape is made from highly recyclable material, and because it's not as degraded by UV radiation as other types of agricultural plastics, it's a strong candidate for recycling. And there are already groups across the state, like Netafim, who have demonstrated that drip tape can be effectively collected and recycled into new drip tape. Additionally, there are pilot projects, like the one started by California Marine Sanctuary Foundation in Monterey County, that show that inclusive and stakeholder-driven engagement can help to design systems that align incentives and overcome barriers to increasing recycling rates. But scaling these systems up across the state is challenging. It will require coordination across the supply chain, investments to overcome market challenges, and adequate infrastructure. Next, please. Unlike drip tape, oh, sorry, one back. Oh, is there not one in between? No worries. Unlike drip tape, mulch films and hoop houses are above ground plastics, and that makes them visible not just to the eye, but also from space. We're exploring how remote sensing techniques can help us map where these plastics are used, how much land they cover, and how that's changing over time. We've built a preliminary model that detects mulch film and hoop house plastics from Sentinel-2 satellite imagery. And so far, we've mapped this across 3 important berry growing regions in California: Santa Cruz, Santa Barbara, and Ventura counties. In the map shown here, you can see examples of the detected mulch films in yellow and hoop houses in red and other agricultural land with no plastic in blue across these 3 counties. The detected acreage of plastic mulch was much greater than that of hoop houses and was often located next to major waterways, which you can see in this example from Watsonville on the left. Next, please. The graph shown here shows the total detected acreage of plastic mulch films and hoop houses across these 3 counties from 2019 to the 2023 water year, with the mulch films shown in the green colors and the hoop houses shown in the brown colors for each of the 3 counties. Across these counties, we've estimated that over 50,000 acres of cropland were covered in plastic mulch or hoop houses during the 2023 water year, accounting for just over 20% of the total agricultural land in these counties. However, that figure varies significantly. with some counties like Santa Cruz having nearly 50% of agricultural land covered in plastic. This approach offers a powerful and scalable way to fill these critical data gaps, and we are working with the relevant state agencies here in California to put this tool to use. But there's also an opportunity to scale practices like this beyond California. Globally, plastic mulch is the dominant form of agricultural plastics, and this approach offers a cost-effective way to map and monitor these plastics and to provide critical data to help design more effective management solutions. Next, please. While agricultural plastics offer real benefits, they also carry risks that we are just beginning to understand. In filling these important data gaps in California, we have a better chance to manage their use and therefore reduce harm to California's lands, waters, and farming communities while preserving the tools that help agriculture thrive. We are excited and looking to collaborate with local and global partners to find solutions to monitoring and management that can protect our environment, support our farmers, and ensure a resilient food future. Thank you all for attending, and I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Sarah. So our first question is from Afreen Malik. How do levels of microplastics on agricultural lands compare with non-agricultural lands?
Like my role, we're not exactly studying the microplastic content on agricultural lands versus elsewhere. But perhaps you can connect with Seeta. It sounds like that is something that her lab certainly is investigating.
And I'll add, maybe we can add the link, but John Olson from CSUMB recently did an analysis into that, looking exactly at that, comparing urban areas versus agriculture areas. So we can link in that report in the chat.
And then a follow-up question is, how much of the drip tape used in these counties is actually recycled? And do we have data on this?
That's a great question. I like county by county, I'm not sure. I think the recycling is a bit complicated at the moment. There are private groups that do collection for recycling pickups. And then there are these like smaller pilot projects that are looking to increase recycling rates. But recycling data on the whole is actually challenging to come by in California. And so we don't have the best data on what is recycled and especially what kinds of agricultural plastics are recycled. But perhaps someone from California Marine Sanctuary Foundation, if you want to chime in on the pilot project that you all have run and how that increased recycling in Monterey.
Yes. And again, I encourage everyone to look at our previous webinar because we did a deep dive into that program. We actually had Region Waste Management Center from Monterey join us in that webinar. But annually, they're recycling or collecting about 2 million pounds of drip tape. And Hoop House Films at Monterey with that collection program. And then that's separate then, as Sarah mentioned, Netafim that also has their own collection programs. And they work really closely with other collaborators such as Andros and Flipping Iron. And then there's also other manufacturers that are either looking into starting their own recycling programs for drip tape or already have some. For example, Rivelis also has a drip tape recycling program as well in place.
Thank you. And then we have another question from Sandra Curtis. Are you aware of anyone looking at the potential health effects from leach chemicals in the plastic on the workers?
Yeah, thank you. Also, a really great question because that is definitely a concern is not just plastic use for the environment, but plastic use for human health and the folks who are out there doing this work. That is not something that we personally are looking into, though I'm sure there are folks out there. The like microplastic in particular impacts on human health is like a rapidly evolving field of study. So I think it is quite new, though there are a lot of groups out there who are looking at that. I don't know about California specifically, though.
And question David had Do you coordinate with water agencies as to the effect of plastic use on the resource aquifers?
Oh, sorry, the water coordinating with water agencies, was that the question?
Yes.
Okay. So we are fairly focused right now on just trying to kind of quantify the like how much of these different types of plastic is being used where. But we do have folks at the Nature Conservancy who work really closely with water agencies and who are focused specifically on groundwater. So we do have that concept that would be a great thing to look into and some connections I think that we could do that with.
Thank you, Sarah. And then we do have another question. I think this will be, or we might have time for one more, but Marcia asked, do you have data comparing fossil-based or bio-based compostable mulch and its impact on the soil?
Okay, sorry, I muted myself and then had a hard time coming back. I don't. So I have not looked very in depth at the differences between fossil fuel-based plastics and bio-based compostable plastics. Though I do believe Elena or others at California Marine Sanctuary have done some work in the biodegradable mulch films. So perhaps you all might have a little bit more information on that.
Yeah, so we do again in the other webinar we focused and talked a lot about our biodegradable project. So that's a USDA funded specialty crop research initiative, and actually Seeta leads the soil work for that project. So Seeta, if you want to respond to that question.
Hi, sure. We have looked at bio-based, so biodegradable plastics are different than bio-based plastics. But speaking about plastics that are designed to be able to be biodegraded in the soil, we have looked at them. We don't see any deleterious effects on soil microbial community activity. Using really, really targeted experiments in the lab. And we've also done buried bag experiments. The issue with biodegradable mulches in our study systems are that the turnover time of the material, so how long it takes to actually degrade to like 95 or 90% of its original mass, is too slow relative to how quickly the crops get turned over. So when you shift from something that uses a mulch to something that doesn't in a field system. So there's a balance between making these materials that are stable when they're on the field, but quickly break down once they're turned over. And I think that that is an ongoing sort of area of exploration by many industry folks right now to try to reduce that plastic waste issue. Other questions?
Thank you, Sita. And I'll also add into the chat Washington State University's Small Fruits team. They have really great infographics of biodegradable mulches, compostable mulches, what they are, and how they biodegrade. So I'll add that into the chat if folks are interested. But I'll have to wrap it up for the questions for Sarah. Thank you, Sarah. And I'm going to pass it off to Jean Jones from SWIX.
All right, I think I've got you. Can you hear me? Hello?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, great. All right, Gene Jones. I'm with the Southern Waste Information Exchange, and I've been working on ag plastics for quite a while. If you will allow me, I'll kind of walk you through what's going on here in the state of Florida. You'll click on the next slide. The way the film, I'm specifically going to be talking about mulch film. I have done a little bit of work on the drip tape as well, but for the purpose of this presentation, we're going to talk a little bit about mulch film. So the way the film, as already mentioned, is typically very labor intensive. It's pulled by hand out of the field. Next slide. And then from there, it is piled up. Next slide. Into some very, very large piles here in the state of Florida. Next slide. It is managed in the form of either sending it to landfills. This is a site in Immokalee, Florida, if you're familiar where Naples is. This is what are called monofills. So these particular landfill cells are nothing but mulch film that have been collected over the years. Next slide. The other way that is managed, unfortunately, is there is an exemption in our Solid Waste Act here in the state of Florida that allows farmers to burn in the field, open field burning, at the end of the growing season of all polyethylene film. So a good bulk of that material is burnt in the field. Next slide. Here you can see a good example of open field burning. This is in the same fields that they're going to grow the next crops. So, I've been trying to encourage, and I'm glad we have some scientists on this webinar to look at the effects of not only, the effects of burning soil, microplastics in the soil, but what about burning of the plastics in the soil, and then potential uptake of those residuals back into the plants. So hopefully that will be addressed. Next slide. Good example of what happens after you burn. So they pile stuff up, pile the plastic up into little piles, add a little bit of diesel fuel to it, burn it. It's more of a volume reduction than anything in the field. So basically what they're then doing is collect the residual plastics and either send it off to a landfill or plow them back into the ground. Next slide. I got a grant. I got involved in this in 1999 when I was asked to do a technical advisory group for the Department of Environmental Protection. Looking at the agency knew that this was an issue, and they wanted to find out why is this material not being collected and recycled. And I'll share with you some of my findings. There was a question I think Helena asked about, how difficult it is to recycle this stuff. And I'll share with you why it's not traditionally being recycled and what the reasons are. So I got a grant looking at baling the material out of the field. Next slide. And then sending it off to various recycling. I've sent material to China, Malaysia, Taiwan, Romania, of all places, here in the United States to several different plastic recyclers. And everything that I've done in my work with collecting the film out of the field and trying to find traditional recycling markets hasn't worked because of, next slide, the amount of soil contamination on the film. And so what I'll share with you right now, this is a microscopic view of virgin mulch film. And you see what these little square patterns here, this is called embossing. And so they emboss the film to give the film rigidity. So as they expand it over the mound that you saw in some of the prior pictures, it doesn't tear. Next slide. This is the same film after it's been land applied. And just to kind of give you an idea of how small that micro pattern is, that crystal that you see up here in the upper portion of that image is actually a grain of sand. So I don't know how the manufacturers do it, but it is an extremely small micro pattern that they weave into that film to give it the rigidity that they need. What you'll also notice this is a biofilm is accumulated in that pattern, so you don't see the squares as brightly as what you saw in the prior photo. Next slide. I wanted to know, all right, traditional recycling. I've had brokers tell me that have been collecting this material out of the field saying that it's 25% contamination, 50% contamination, 70% contamination. I wanted to know myself. So I took some shredded film. Next slide. This is basically a pound sample of shredded mulch film that we collected and shredded up in one of our trials. Next slide. And I went through a wash process. So next slide. I took the film, put it in some water, a little detergent, swished it around, and I did like a 3 bath process. So you hear a triple rinsing. So that's basically what I tried to replicate in this trial. Next slide. And allow the film, moved it from one bin after I started off to the next slide. And then added a little flocculant to the water bins so that I could separate out the sediment. Next slide. And then next slide. And then I screened out all the higher, the sand particles and so forth. Next slide. And let that dry. And then I evaporated the water out of the residual amount of material that I had so that I could then separate the water out and get a better idea of what was actually in there. Next slide. And lo and behold, out of that 16-ounce sample, I was left with 4 ounces of clean plastic. Next slide. I had roughly 8 ounces, 8.5 ounces of soil. Next slide. And then roughly an ounce of what I call the micro dust. I don't know if that's the correct term. I'm not a soil scientist, but there's a fine level. It could be some of the biofilm that was associated with the film coming off the film. Next slide, kind of summarize everything. So total sample weight, soil and moisture is roughly 74%. And so that left us with roughly 71% soil, 72% soil and microdust. Next slide. So that led me down the path of, all right, so traditional recycling, the issue is the amount of soil. What can we do to try to leave as much soil as we can in the field, which is where it needs to stay? It's topsoil, so we want to leave it there. So we looked at developing technology to extract the film out of the field, as well as develop some methodology to try to leave the soil in place. So next slide. We went down the path of actually pulling the film out of the field, typically the way it's done, and just basically dropped it in the field, let it lay there for about 15 to 20 minutes. And what we noticed is that by doing that, giving it a little bit of residence time, and then rolling the film up by the vibratory action of rolling the film down the field, you reduce the amount of soil that's on that film. Next slide. It's part of the rolling process where we're moving the film out of the fields, down the roads, onto a roller. Next slide. And what you end up with is a much cleaner product that can then be sent to recycling. All right, next slide. Looking at the potential end markets for this, if the level of collecting the film out of the field, you can't, the farmers want to clear those fields out as soon as they can. So a bulk of the farmers are going to do it the old traditional way. They want to keep the laborers on site and busy. And, I've tried to work with the farming community to look at ways to mechanically extract the film out of the field. But for the most part, the majority of the farmers are going to do it the old-fashioned way. And so if you're left at that, the traditional recycling is kind of minimized, and which led me down the path of, all right, this material is petroleum-based. It's got a high BTU value, roughly 19,000 on clean mulch film. But you add 71% soil contamination to it, you're going to reduce the value of that film from a BTU value perspective. So I've looked at maybe we can use it as an alternative fuel for the cement industry or as a feedstock for conversion, advanced recycling. So let me kind of show you where that has led us. Next slide. First off, you have to realize how you're going to have to process the film. So I've run 5 different trials with 5 different shredding technologies. On the shredding end, the issue is traditional shredders can't deal with the amount of soil contamination. So that led me down the path of looking at the construction and demolition debris industry because they manufacture shredders that will devour just about anything. And so this is a trial that we ran at a cement plant where we shredded the film and then ran it through a shaker screen. Next slide. Next slide. So we're shredding the film, running it through the screen itself to reduce that soil level out. Next slide. And next slide again. You kind of see the amount of soil that's associated with that. A lot of microplastics, plastic pieces still in that film that would need to be screened out further. But you're reducing, just by doing this, you're reducing the soil level on that film. Next slide. And then from there, that film is then used in the cement plant that we ran our trial with as an alternative fuel. So 95% of the cement industry, cement plants in the U.S. burn coal. They all have an interest to reduce the sulfur emissions coming from the plants. So they're interested in finding high BTU value materials that can use to reduce air emissions. So ag film, ag mulch, ag plastics in general is a great feedstock for the cement industry. The other potential is for use as a feedstock for the pyrolysis industry, advanced chemical recycling. So next series of slides I'm going to show you is a project that we're doing in LaBelle, Florida. Go back to that one before, if you can. There you go. All right, so this is a company called RCL Operations in LaBelle, Florida. They started up about 8 years ago trying to process mulch film. And lo and behold, the equipment they got could not deal with the amount of soil contamination. So they ended up shifting their business model to recycle plastic bags coming out of the grocery stores. I kept them up to date of what I was doing on my research, looking at the construction and demolition debris equipment, and was able to actually get a grant here in the state of Florida through the Department of Agriculture to buy some equipment that we could place outside. So RCL operations have had roughly 50,000 tons of mulch film sitting on their property that they couldn't do anything with. So we brought in some equipment. Next slide. This is an M&J shredder. This is a beast. It will devour mulch film. We can process roughly 10 tons an hour of mulch film with this piece of equipment. And then from there, we ran a series of trials with various screening technologies. Next one. And next slide. What we ultimately ended up with, you can leave it there. I can walk everybody kind of through this. So you can see in the upper portion, we're grabbing the film from the piles, putting it into the shredder, and then from in the shredder, it goes into a trommel screen. Next slide. And we're, again, reducing the amount of soil coming off this initial trommel screen. Next slide. Good picture of the amount of soil that's coming out of one of the conveyor belts. And then next slide. From there, let me just kind of stop here and walk everybody through that initial trommel screen. I can't show you all the pictures from the plant, but I will tell you it goes from that initial trommel screen into a secondary trommel screen into a third trommel screen that has got water to it. So we're actually washing the film. From there, it drops into a wash tank where roughly 90% of the soil is removed through that initial first part of the process. From there, it goes inside the plant where you might expect a traditional film recycling plant to have various types of equipment. It's further size reduced, goes into two more wash tanks, into a dryer, and then pelletized. So what you're seeing here is the pelletized product. And finally, let me show you the next slide so you can see what that pelletized product looks like. Is right there. And then for everything that is being generated right now in the Bell plant is going to ExxonMobil in Houston. Exxon developed a pyrolysis system plant there in Houston, and all the material from this project is going to them for going back into petrochemicals. So it can show you what this whole idea of recycling plastics, agricultural plastics, can work. It just takes, I think, I saw a comment from Pierre, it takes a lot of money and it takes a lot of ingenuity to deal with the amount of soil that's on this film in plastics. On the drip tape side, let me just conclude. The drip tape is much easier to deal with. The contamination level based on our samples is more like 8% soil contamination. So it's far much more amenable to be able to recycle compared to the mulch film. But there is an opportunity with the mulch film if somebody's got the intuition and the financial backing to make it happen. So with that, I will turn it back to the group for questions. Um, and I also encourage if anybody on the webinar today has an interest on the recycling side, please try and join us at the Ag Plastics Recycling Conference in San Diego next month. Thank you.
Thank you, Jean. And so we have our first question from Afreen. What is the carbon footprint of sending plastics overseas, and what actually happens there? Is the plastic recycled?
Yes, it is. I don't know what the carbon footprint is. I haven't looked at that.
Okay.
I will tell you that historically, the various types of greenhouse films, not so much the mulch films, but mainly the greenhouse films, the hoop films, are being recycled overseas. Um, and they have a number of different ways that they do that. Some of the horror stories I've seen is some of the films are actually being washed in rivers. Um, some of them some of the facilities are much more sophisticated and have, complete recycling lines to be able to recycle the films.
Thank you, Jean. And then, sorry, what cost-effective solutions or support systems exist to help support farmers recycle their agricultural plastics?
None that I'm aware of right now in the United States. I know there's some talk about extended producer responsibility coming up for some of these films to be able to set aside some money that would go back to support recycling efforts. Personally, I hope that happens. I think it's needed. Um, yeah, the farmers are in a difficult position, right? They need to be able to, look at the bottom line. And if they were forced to um, dispose of this plastic, um, or come up with a way to recycle it on their own, it's going to put them at a disadvantage, and it's going to affect the industry. So I'm hoping that there will be the wherewithal either by the manufacturers to step in to try to help solve the problem, or at the federal or state level.
Thank you, Jean. And that's it for our question period for Jean. If you have any follow-up questions, please put them in the chat and Jean can respond. But I'll now pass it off to Giulia Carcasci from the FAO, and she'll be discussing plasticulture at an international perspective.
Thank you very much. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Welcome, everyone, and thank you so much again for inviting us to this webinar. Today I will discuss an international perspective on plastics use in agriculture and the role of FAO. Next slide, please. So I will not give much of an introduction on what agricultural plastics are, because the speakers before me already did an excellent job as that. So as you know, agricultural plastics are used for many excellent reasons by farmers, and these items allow them to produce more food using less resources. At the same time, however, their use, mismanagement can lead to adverse environmental impacts. And specifically, FAO estimates that 13.4 million tons of agricultural plastics are used yearly in agriculture. You may have seen in previous slides the number of 12.5 million tons. In an unpublished paper, FAO is updating these numbers to reflect growth during the years. And it is estimated that approximately almost half of these items, 40%, are plastic films used for mulch, for greenhouse covers, and the data is incomplete, but it can be estimated that over 60% of global terrestrial agri-plastic use occurs in Asia. The degradation of larger agri-plastic items, such as mulch films, greenhouse covers, is only one source of microplastic pollution in soil. Other sources include sewage sludge application, rainfall, irrigation water, surface runoff, which can carry microplastics from different environments into agricultural fields. It is also of concern what we are seeing in soils. Microplastic concentrations are rising, reaching in some cases up to 0.3% in half of the fields studied, according to a still unpublished FAO report. Concentrations of microplastics may already exceed safe ecological thresholds. Next slide, please. The impacts of micro and nanoplastic pollution span across the entire One Health spectrum, affecting soil, plant, animal, and human health in interconnected ways. Plastics accumulate in soil through degradation of agri-plastics, as mentioned, sewage sludge runoff, atmospheric deposition. These can lead to reduced soil quality, disrupted microbial communities, lower fertility, and there is a lack of harmonized monitoring systems and a lack of standardized testing protocols for the detection analysis of micro and nanoplastics in soil. In plants, plastic particles can cling to roots and hinder the nutrient uptake. There is also evidence of an uptake into the edible plant tissues that has been documented for some crops, including lettuce, carrots. This can also cause reduced crop quality, reduced biomass and yield, and it can induce phytotoxicity. In animals, there is evidence of the ingestion of plastics via contaminated soil, feed, or water. Plastics are found in internal organs of livestock, and they may affect immunity, fertility, and growth. And there is also a risk of transfer of microplastics to humans through the consumption of animal products. Finally, in humans, there are multiple exposure pathways, so the ingestion of microplastics through food and water is one of them, inhalation is another. Microplastics, as I'm sure you have heard, have now been detected in all of the human body, blood, lungs, and placenta. Microplastic presence in the human body has been linked to potential health effects, including endocrine disruption, inflammation, oxidative stress. For this reason, food safety risk assessments are urgently needed. Next slide, please. In 2021, FAO published the report, Assessment of Agricultural Plastics and Their Sustainability, a call for action, which raised awareness on the impacts of plastics used in agriculture and their consequences for food safety and food security. Presented with these facts in 2022, FAO members, so national governments, through the 28th session of the Committee of Agriculture, COAG 28, recommended FAO to develop a voluntary code of conduct on the sustainable use and management of plastics in agriculture. Voluntary code of conduct are policy tools that FAO uses. They're voluntary guidelines that are available to support members and both governmental and non-governmental stakeholders dedicated to specific issues and topics, in this case, use and management of plastics in agriculture. So having received this mandate, FAO conducted a comprehensive consultation process with government and stakeholders to develop this code of conduct that was reviewed last September by COAG 29. And while the code was not universally endorsed, it was published online in February this year as a provisional code of conduct, and it is now available to those countries that wish to implement it as a guiding framework. Next slide, please. The objectives of the Voluntary Code of Conduct is to present a set of science-based guiding principles for responsible practices. It offers a framework for developing strategies, policies, programs to foster cooperation among stakeholders, facilitating knowledge dissemination, and the development of alternative practices. This Code of Conduct is voluntary, non-legally binding, and global in scope. It addresses the full life cycle of plastics used in agriculture from design to manufacturing, and includes guidance both towards governments, but also non-governmental stakeholders such as agri-food producers and stakeholders along the plastic value chain. And as you can see, there's a QR code on the slide in case you wish to download the publication. Next slide, please. Specifically, some of the measures recommended by the Provisional Code of Conduct include discouraging the use where possible of oxo-degradable plastics, of non-biodegradable polymer-coated fertilizer and seeds, the use of PVC, and PFAS-containing coatings. Next slide, please. FAO addresses the issue of micro and nanoplastics in soil as pollutants using a holistic approach that addresses the entire life of contaminants. This work is led by the Global Soil Partnership, supported by the International Network on Soil Pollution. Key activities from these projects include awareness raising and farmer training on pollution prevention and risk reduction. Part of this program is the Global Soil Doctor Program, which offers a specific module on soil pollution management at the farm level. In addition, in collaboration with the joint FAO-IAA Center, FAO is developing standardized protocols for detecting and quantifying microplastics in soils. You may remember we mentioned earlier that there is a lack of standardized methods for identifying microplastics in soils. And FAO also works on the impacts of microplastics on food safety and human health. Specifically, an exposure assessment was carried out to evaluate human exposure to microplastic contaminated seafood. This research found that the worst case scenario in this report still indicates that this exposure is negligible compared to other sources. However, more research is needed in this area. And also regarding the methodologies for sampling and the analysis of microplastics in food, just like the ones in soil, these methodologies are not harmonized, are not standardized. And for this reason, FAO Subcommittee on Fish Trade requested FAO to start working on this, on the development of standards for testing microplastics in food commodities. And this issue was also presented to the Codex Committee on Methods of Analysis and Sampling. Next slide, please. FAO also has work on the ground supporting members, supporting countries with the improved management of plastics in agriculture. Particularly, there is a project called FARM, which stands for Financing Agrochemical Reduction and Management, financed by Jeff. And this project has the aim of improving agrochemicals and agroplastic waste reduction and management in Uruguay and Kenya. And part of this project objective include the establishment and strengthening of the extended producer responsibility schemes for the safe collection and recycling where possible of agricultural plastics waste. Next slide, please. FAO also engages as an observer in the work of the Intergovernmental Negotiating Committee. As some background, in 2022, the United Nations Environment Assembly initiated the development of an international legally binding instrument on plastic pollution. With this Intergovernmental Negotiating Committee, INC meetings, to which FAO is engaging as an observer. FAO supports its members and advocates for a treaty that takes into account benefits and trade-offs, sustainability aspects of plastics used in the agri-food sector. Also highlighting the perspective and the role of key stakeholders, including smallholder farmers. FAO also advocates for a sectorial approach complemented by dedicated programs of work, which is essential to ensure that the new instrument delivers actionable solutions for each different sectors. As you know, plastics are used in agriculture, but in other key sectors such as packaging, healthcare, and many other industry, and each has its own specific challenges and management needs. And next slide, please. I am coming to a conclusion of my presentation. FAO supports an ambitious treaty that protects the environment and human health from the adverse effects of plastic pollution. The treaty should include urgent global action to reduce plastic production and consumption to sustainable levels. It should also establish binding measures to eliminate harmful plastic products and chemicals of concern, particularly those that endanger food systems, ecosystems, and health. The redesign of plastic products is essential to reduce risk and includes reusability, recyclability, and use of safer alternatives. And finally, fair and accessible financial and technical support must be guaranteed in the treaty, enabling all countries to implement this treaty and transition towards more sustainable solutions. Next slide, please. And with this, I arrive to the end of my presentation, and I thank you.
Thank you so much, Giulia. So our first question is, are there support structures, financial or technical, for countries to help them adopt this voluntary code of conduct, particularly for developing nations?
Sorry, I had muted myself again. Thank you for unmuting me. So far, we have this voluntary code of conduct that is available to members. We do not have a structure yet in place to support countries to adhere to it, but we are actively looking to establish partnerships and finding routes to make this happen. Please consider this was just approved last September, so it's ongoing work to implement it with willing countries.
Thank you. And then we have a question from Sarah Hudo. Does the FAO interact with the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services on these best practices and guidance?
We interacted with the U.S. administration largely during the consultation process for the development of the voluntary code of conduct, particularly with other departments, working on environment and working on agriculture, not as much those involving health. It is what FAO is trying to do is to include the health dimension more and more into the plastics agenda, which traditionally is assessed. It engages more the ministries of environment and agriculture, so not yet.
Thank you, Giulia. And then we have a follow-up question from Afreen. You mentioned that 60% of the plastics globally are used in Asia. Is that correct? Is this only in agriculture or all industries? And how does this pan per capita?
That is correct. Please consider this is based on estimates. Sometimes these estimates are based on what we know of one country, and then it's replicated to make, again, estimates about other countries. Particularly in Asia, China is one of the countries with the biggest use. I wouldn't know about other industries, and I also wouldn't know how this pan out per capita, but yes, the figure is correct. Again, knowing there's no clear data and it's based on estimates.
Thank you, Giulia. That's all the questions that I see. Does anyone else have any questions? Okay, and with that, we'll move into our panel discussion with our speakers, and that will be moderated by Jasmine.
Great, thank you.
Great, thank you all. And if all the speakers can, oh, great, awesome, thank you. And I just had a comment to what the report from the FAO, and particularly, I think, California has been really on top of looking at different end-of-life solutions, and we work really closely with partners, and a lot of our partners who are here on the audience here today. This, however, sort of the recommendations from the FAO, I thought was really important, and something that I think the agriculture community in California can really take a close look. And I think particularly for point number 2 with the polymer coated fertilizers and seeds, I know that is still a technology that gets used, but perhaps we can start exploring alternatives. So I just wanted to bring that up to the attention of our audience. But for this panel discussion, we wanted to really focus on sort of looking into the future of plastic culture. Our next webinar that will be hosted sometime in October or September, date to be determined, will focus on the future of plastic culture. And so we wanted to give a little teaser into that. And our first question that we have for our panel, and Giulia, we'll start with you for this question, is what successful policies are in place in other regions to address plastic culture use and pollution?
Thank you very much for your question. We mentioned EPR scheme in my presentation and others. These are in place in a few European countries, such as France has a very successful EPR scheme. So does Brazil, for example, a very successful one for pesticide containers as well. And this is one of the policies. Another one are plastic bans that can address specific problematic plastics products used in agriculture. For example, what you just mentioned, polymer, non-biodegradable polymer-coated seeds and fertilizers that have been banned by European Union, with a ban that will enter into force in coming years. Otherwise, we also have some design features embedded in national policies. For example, China has a minimum thickness for plastic mulch that allows retrieval, safe retrieval without tearing.
And same question for the rest of the panel speakers, if anybody wants to step in on that. The question was, what successful policies are in place in other regions to address plastic culture use and pollution that you're aware of?
I'm not aware of any.
Were you going to say something, Sarah?
Yeah, but Jean can go first. No worries.
No, I was just saying that I'm not aware of anything in place at this time.
Oh, yeah, I think Giulia certainly has kind of the global purview on what some of these policies are. And as a scientist, like I'm not a policy expert, but I think it's important that from what I've seen, there's not like a one size approach to addressing agricultural plastic use. And I think the plastics that we use vary widely in terms of how durable they are, how often they're used, the like presence and viability of alternatives, and all of those things kind of affect like what policy tools we have at our disposal. So the product bans is a great example, like when effective alternatives are there that are like biodegradable and less harmful, that's kind of a clear option to take, but a lot of plastics don't have those kind of substitutions available. So like other considerations might be like making them more durable forms of plastic, using different technologies to remove them that allow them to be more recycled, like investing in recycling infrastructure, the kind of EPR schemes for collection and recycling. And so I think there's kind of a wide range of possibilities and ways to address this problem. And it won't be one option won't work for every type of plastic. And I think it probably will take a combination of approaches to really address the issue.
Yeah. And given that we work really closely in this space as well, the California Marine Sanctuary Foundation does not take an active role in policymaking or anything of that kind. However, from our perspective, we also understand that different practices need to be explored, especially when you're working with growers that are sort of large scale growers. And then it's really hard to bring practices that might be successful for large scale growers to more medium sized growers or what we call micro scale growers that may have 2 acres or less. And so I think as part of that, it's important to look at different practices for different scale growers. Great, thank you. And the other question that we have for the group here, the panel, is how do we create a domestic infrastructure to maximize agricultural plastic collection and processing, such as recycling of used plastics, without having to ship it out and export it to other countries?
I'll take that one and give you my take on it. For me, it has to be the industry that steps up to the plate to try to help solve the issue. I also think that there should be the potential to have grant funding available from not only at the federal level but state level, specifically the states where the bulk of the plastics are being used, ag plastics. So I know here in the state of Florida, I can say I'm delighted the state of Florida stepped up to the plate last year to provide a funding to where we could get the equipment that we needed for our project. But I think there needs to be more of that. Just here in the state of Florida, we generate roughly 40,000 tons of mulch film on an annual basis. The bulk of it is burnt. I hate to say it, but that's the truth. The bulk of it is burnt in the field. And so, if the legislators want to stop that, the farming community and the recyclers need some assistance. And I think that's across the board.
Yeah, I think in California, probably like similar to the rest of the US, but California only recycles like less than 9% of all plastics it produces, not just agriculture, but across the board plastics. And that's pretty similar figure for North America and the globe, like all plastics globally. And so I think there's definitely like a couple things at play. Like end of life management is important for plastics where reducing the plastic or banning it is not a clear option. And I think we do have some examples of what recycling can look like for agricultural plastics. I think Netafim here in California is a great example. It is more specifically drip tape, but they do vertically integrated recycling. And so I think drip tape in particular is highly recyclable and maintains its like product quality at very high ratios of recycled plastic input. But there's not really the right economic incentives for other people to come into this space or for farmers to currently be recycling. And so I think like infrastructure is one piece. We need the capacity to recycle more plastics and the right kinds of technologies to do those things. And maybe like one option is using the funds from Senate Bill 54 which in California is the single-use plastic packaging policy. It specifically does not require agriculture is the one of the key industries that is exempt from that policy. But I think the funds that will go into expanding infrastructure in California to meet the recycling requirements of that policy could have co-benefits for the ability to recycle agricultural plastics. But that only seems like half of the kind of problem. There's a lot of barriers to farmers, like Jasmine was saying, actually participating in these types of programs. They need the right kinds of equipment to pull films and other things off the field in a way that allows them to be recycled. They have to meet collection minimums. It has to be, so I think we have to be really conscious around the way we design these systems to like help overcome some of those barriers and actually make sure that people can participate in the programs if we have once we have the infrastructure to support them.
Yeah, good point. Julia or Seeta, did either of you want to add anything else?
I think that answer was sufficient. Like right now, it's so integrated into so many sectors, both in agriculture and elsewhere. Um, I think that without industry controls and top-down controls, it's really hard from a bottom-up perspective. I think identifying sort of the scope of the problem is really the first step towards creating policies that actually incentivize reduction and efficacious recycling and reuse.
And to add to this, so when we first started working with ag plastic, we quickly realized that, in order to move forward, there had to be a collaboration across the chain. And I think this is something that you see both at the Ag Plastic Recycling Conference as well as at the AMI Plastics or Agricultural Films Conference. That there's a lot of more representation from manufacturers as well. And I know in our panel, we don't have manufacturers today. I know we have some manufacturer representation in the audience. But I do just want to mention that is part of the process, and I agree with you all. And in one of the projects that we have where we're looking at collection for recycling of the mulch, we are working with manufacturers and creating sort of more updated mulch technologies that are thicker, so that way you can pull out the plastic more easily and you don't have those residues staying behind. And also I agree with you all that having that federal and state support has been very helpful. In past speaking sessions, we've invited Netafim, and they've talked about sort of when they first started this process, they did get a grant from Cal Recycle, I believe was the source, that helped them establish their plant in the Fresno area that allows them to recycle their drip tape now. So all of these different parts are very helpful. And I know that even some of the we've gotten a lot of support even from members such as the California Strawberry Commission that have written letters to continue to support funding for these kinds of projects. So there's different members across the supply chain and within the ag industry that have been very supportive in all of this. And I think all of that is really key to move forward in that direction. Our third question that we have for the panel is, from your perspective, what is the future of plastic culture policy? Are regulations and extended producer responsibilities coming too fast or too slow?
I'll chime in on that one real quick. Only because I know we're going to do a session at APRC that is going to be on EPR, right? And so we got some folks, not only manufacturers, but we've got stakeholders. We've got Product Steward Institute is going to be involved in that. So what you're starting to see is the discussion amongst some of the states about EPR for some of the ag plastics. And I think what industry is, their fear is, oh my gosh, I've got 6 or 7 states now that are talking about this. That means 6 or 7 different ways that I've got to deal with what we manufacture, what we sell, and it's differently. So I would think that if this discussion happens, industry would be more inclined, and I can't speak for industry, but I can tell you from some of the comments I've had with some of the representatives that they'd be more inclined to say, let's do this from a federal perspective. But I just don't see that happening anytime soon. So I think what's going to happen is there's going to be states that they'll come out. I'm sure California will be one of them right off the bat down the road that will have something on EPR for mulch films. And that might transcend to other states. So that's my perspective.
Sarah, did you want to add anything?
Thanks. Sorry, it's like maybe we should just stay unmuted. Yeah, thanks, Jean. I agree. I think like other than kind of what we discussed earlier about some policies in place, like globally, there's very little regulation on agricultural plastics. And so I think, to ensure health of communities and ecosystems and the ability for farmers to continue to meet growing food demands, there will need to be additional thoughtful regulation in the coming years. And I think some of the just most straightforward ones include the plastic polymer coating bans. These are like known sources of microplastics in the soil. There are less harmful alternatives that exist, and regulations have been passed in other jurisdictions, in particular the EU, that would give us kind of a blueprint for how we can adapt and have those kinds of regulations here. So I think there are definitely a few things that just make a lot of sense. And then EPR is just more challenging. I think it has a path forward, but I think in California, thinking about how to design that thoughtfully in a way that will bring the most benefit is important. But I think it is certainly in the future.
Yeah, go ahead, Julia. Thank you.
Thank you. Perfect. I agree with what Sara also mentioned, and I think EPR regulations have a role to play in shaping future policies regarding agroplastics. Of course, they only target downstream measures, right? So it's only about safe collection and recycling, and so we will also need upstream measures such as bans. EPR schemes are one of the great advantages, of course, is their financing scheme, which is very appealing. There's appetite from governments for them because they sound like a free of charge solution to a problem. Of course, it's more complicated than that, but it has that appeal from national governments. Also, some EPR schemes are already in place for pesticide containers, and those can be expanded into including other agricultural plastic items. So sometimes there is already like an architecture in place that can just be enhanced with further products. So again, I think it's just one of the tools that is available to countries, but we should never forget the importance of reduction and also redesign. We haven't discussed much biodegradable and bio-based alternatives. We should also be part of the solution, which, however, as you know, comes with challenging, especially regarding their actual biodegradability in agricultural soil. So what we consider according to the 6R hierarchy, right? Reducing, reusing, and then recycling and recovery, and so on. Each solution should also be site-specific and really based on specific circumstances.
Yeah, and Pierre also sort of backing and seconding what you're mentioning, also made a comment, which I'll read out loud. He says, while funding could support the implementation of some pilot projects, the collection and recycling systems require industrial societal solutions and involve mobilizing agroplastics manufacturers as key stakeholders in the process, which is why an extended producer responsibility scheme makes sense.
Yes, and Pierre Delepino in the chat intervening collaborates with FAO, also a funder and of Adivalor, the EPR agroplastic scheme in France.
And yeah, the chat is very lively, so it's great to see. The other question that we have for the panel is, what can we do now to address plastic culture waste and pollution that can be widely implemented?
I think it's educating the farmers, right? You start at the point of generation. You start at the point of the sale of the material to begin with. So having the OEMs, OEMs like Netafim, and Toro that are involved in trying to develop programs to, collect what they're selling from the first part and make that available. I mean, that's a benefit on the sales side. If you can sell product and then say, oh, by the way, at the end of its use, we'll take it back and recycle it. I mean, that's just great PR. It shows a commitment to sustainability and the environment, and it's a good business decision. So I'm hopeful that more manufacturers will do that across the board. But to get to your point, Jasmine, it's educating. I mean, here in Florida, for the farmers, not to burn, right? So, and that's it. It takes a commitment. It takes an effort to get the word out, and can make the convincing argument that you don't want to burn this in the field.
I agree, and from our visit that we went out with the Washington State group on the project focused on biodegradable mulch, we did learn about some of the grower shippers that growers will grow for, have asked their growers, if have made it sort of a requirement that they don't burn, and so expanding that across more grower shippers in Florida, I think could also be very beneficial. So that way, the plastic's not burned on site, specifically for Florida. Yeah, go ahead, Sarah.
Oh, I think one other thing that we haven't really discussed as much that I think is really important is monitoring of agricultural plastics and just general data collection. I think, our waste management systems, at least here in California, like aren't collecting information on agricultural plastics. So we really to the wonderful questions in the chat of like, how much is being recycled right now? Like, we simply don't know. We don't even know how much is being used. And so I think also this kind of monitoring and collecting of the right data has an important role to play, both now our ability to design the right kinds of policies and then our ability to ensure that those policies are being effectively implemented and actually having a meaningful impact on the problem is also kind of an important piece of the puzzle.
Yeah, I concur with what Sarah just said because we've got pretty good data on curbside recycling. We don't have good. All we've got in terms of the ag side is estimates. You're not going to get the detail from the manufacturers of what they're producing and selling, because it's confidential information for the most part. But if we had a way to collect how much data or how much plastic's being landfilled, right, or require that at the landfills, that the reporting capability, that would be great. Here in Florida, it's a little bit different because the majority of the film's being burnt. So I don't think the farmer's going to want to tell you how much they're burning in the field. But if we had some data, that would help. I mean, we've used estimates of how much films being produced based on the amount of film that's applied per acre. So we've got some really good estimates on mulch film, roughly 250 pounds per acre. Here in the state of Florida, and then drip tape, you can add another 77, pounds per acre. So those are some good estimates that you can look at. Well, how many acres of tomatoes, and then you can back in how much is being generated there. And the same thing, whether it's, one crop per season or two crop per season. So there's some ways to estimate how much is being generated.
Sita, did you want to add anything?
I think also having consumer awareness of the amount of plastic that goes into agricultural products and maybe creating some sort of, I mean, this is a complicated call, but to create like a seal or a demarcation similar to organic certification, but either low plastic or plastic-free production. Trying to think about ways to incentivize from both the consumer and the producer to reduce the single-use plastics. I think there are at least some part of the population would pay a financial premium, just like they do for organic or local or whatever, to purchase foods that had either no plastic production or no single-use plastic production, but there's no incentive, right? And from a grower perspective, it's very cost effective to use single-use plastics right now. The cost is borne by everyone through these externalities that we're not measuring very well. And so getting a better handle on the externalities and then incentivizing people to make a choice, it's so ubiquitous that we can't imagine a world that's not based in plastic culture at this point. And I think that that is worth reflecting on because our baseline of what is normal is shifting, right? Like we have populations across the world who don't know any different at this point. Even in the time that I've lived in California, the amount of plastic that covers landscapes has dramatically increased just visually along the Central Coast. So just really thinking deeply about being reflective on how we can address this problem while still producing the food we want with as few resources as possible. It's a lofty goal. There's a lot of people to figure out.
And I'll add to that, Sita, that your team and our team here at CMSF have also explored parallel practices that can be added onto the farm as a way to keep the plastics in the field when they're necessary to be used. And so I know we've looked at both fence lines and the role that fence lines can play. And then we've also looked at vegetative practices, right? And so that's one of the things that we're starting to consider a lot more. And part of our team already has some trials around vegetative ditches, but now understanding that as a practice such as a vegetative ditch, or we also see a lot of growers that will use grass end beds, grass rows have also been a helpful way to kind of act as a buffer that keeps the plastic in the field. And these practices we see can be very beneficial, especially with technologies like a biodegradable mulch, right? That is meant to be tilled into the soil. And there's ways in which you can keep that plastic in that field and not have it go out. It can be beneficial, as well as that vegetative ditches have other benefits. They're pollinator habitat. They can help with water filtration, and they also help with just sequestering carbon. So yeah, our teams have been working together to explore some of these different options as well that can be parallel practices. Great. Well, with that, we'll kind of wrap it up. Thank you all very much. And let me go back to sharing my notes or my screen. Okay, there we go. And I wanted to leave you all with a couple of helpful resources. So you can find additional information, including an assessment of ag plastic use in our Agriculture Water Quality Alliance website at aqua.org. And a huge shout out to Washington State University because as part of their biodegradable mulch project with the USDA, they have a very information dense website and thesmallfruits.wsu.edu. And if you're very interested in ag plastics, they even have a podcast. And so in this podcast, they have different stakeholders from the industry, grower shippers, scientists come in and do deep dives on each of these topics. So I highly recommend that. I had my family and I hear this podcast on a road trip, and they found it very interesting. And then we also have a series of YouTube videos that capture all of our webinars. Most of those videos are available in English and Spanish, so you can find those in our YouTube page under California Marine Sanctuary Foundation. And there's different playlists. You can go into the agriculture playlist to specifically watch these videos. If there are any additional questions, you can email either Alina or myself. We work closely together on this plastic culture work, so happy to help answer those questions, and we can also guide those questions out into the speakers. So happy to follow up via email and conversation there. And, I want to give a special thank you to all of our partners. We work really closely in doing trials with growers and manufacturers in the academia, closely with Washington State University and Cal Poly, and to our speakers, Seeta with Cal Poly, Sarah with the Nature Conservancy, Jean with SWIX, and Julia with the FAO. Thank you all very much for coming and attending this and speaking here. And for the rest of you, we'll leave the last couple of minutes. If you could please take this survey. Again, all of this we are able to fund and put these events together through our grants. And so it's a really great way for us to showcase some of the feedback that we receive from the audience. So this is a very short, probably takes about 3 minutes to go through this survey. If you could please fill in those questions, and we always look back at that feedback as well. But with that, if you have any other questions, we're happy to answer those. And if not, thank you very much for coming, and we appreciate all of your interest and support and your investment of time into this webinar. Thank you. Are there any other questions from the audience? Oh, okay. Oh, we do have questions from the audience. Okay.
We do have, oh, sorry. We do have some questions, and I can scroll up to the top because we had a few that went unanswered. Let me see. Or if anyone does have a burning question, you could also raise your hand and we can unmute you as well.
I want to know where the recording is available.
Oh, the recording of this webinar will be on the California Marine Sanctuary Foundation's YouTube page.
One of the other questions was for Seeta, and the question was, how does burning affect microplastics in agricultural soils, levels, and toxicity? Oh, and I think you're, oh.
Hi, sorry. I sent a message back to that participant directly. Our lab hasn't studied burning plastic on soil health. It's not as common in our state because it's illegal here. However, there is work from other states. So Penn State has a great website on some of the effects of burning agricultural. It can release dioxins into the atmosphere. Those are toxins that are not good for you to breathe, and ash and particulate matter. That ash can also stay on the soil and increase hydrophobicity of the soil. So like the water it doesn't interact with hydrophobic particles, and it can release contaminants. And so as I said, I directly answered that question for the chat participant, but there are a multitude of effects from burning plastics. You don't want to breathe it in. I think most importantly, from a human health perspective, the soil impacts I think are less clear because they're not super well, quantified as it is not a legal practice where we are.
And then there was another question for you that you might have already answered, not sure, in the chat. But the question is for Seeta, how do levels of microplastics on agricultural lands compare, with non-agricultural lands?
So I think that from my understanding, so this is an emerging literature on terrestrial microplastics. And so there's new papers and data coming out all the time. I believe that agricultural lands, so especially where there's particles that are being applied not intentionally, but either through fertilizers or through sludge or things that have like compost, industrial compost or urban compost that might have plastics in it, can be quite high. Urban soils can also have very high contaminants of plastics, especially along roadways. Some of our fields that we say have pretty low concentrations of plastics and primarily polyethylene, so almost certainly derived from mulches. So it really does vary. And in the next coming years, we're going to see a lot more data coming out from surveys that are happening across the world, trying to identify the quantity of these microplastics. The other thing I just want to add quickly is that when you're looking at counts, right, it's challenging because one particle, if split in half, can become two particles, and two fibers can become four fibers. So I urge caution with thinking about counts in themselves without a broader context of like how much plastic is being applied to the landscape that we can actually quantify in terms of mass or amount per unit time or like, per season. Some of these sort of bigger plastic particles, while less, I think, fancy and less in the news, are a lot easier to actually quantify and they are the source of these microplastics to a large extent. So don't get alarmed if you see these really high counts because again, these materials fragment, right? This is the nature of micro and nanoplastics.
Great, thank you, Seeta. And we have 2 minutes left of the webinar, but Jean, there was one question for you. And the question was, how problematic is it to recycle plastic with soil residues?
Well, it is problematic, and that gets to some of the issues that I've showed in my slides. Is that it's in order to address the issue, you've got to have the equipment and you've got to have the money, right? Because it's not cheap, and so it's going to take a level of effort to get you to where you're able to deal with the amount of soil contamination.
Yeah. And to add a little bit, just as a comparison, you know, Florida, of course, has its own set of regulatory policies, and California has its own set. And so here in California, it's very difficult to have, any wastewater. And so some of the efforts that we've worked on, and we talked about this in the previous webinar, really focused on a dry wash. So not using water to wash the plastic film. And but even more beyond that, the biggest challenge or one of the biggest challenges with having so much soil on that plastic is that when you're processing it through the machines, that sand and that soil really impacted the machinery as it's going through. And so that's one of the things that in the surveys stakeholders have responded. And so yeah, so it is difficult. And here in California, the process that we are exploring with Andros and Flipping it's a dry wash system, essentially using no water, because it would just be not cost effective and really difficult to use any water here. And with that, we've come to the end. I think we were actually able to answer all of the questions in the chat as well. So great job, team. And again, thank you all very much for coming in, to both the speakers and the audience, and have a great day. And with that, we'll end the webinar.
Thanks for putting it on.
Great, thank you.